Speech given by the Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1963, and it's relating to this week's Torah portion that we're reading, this week's Torah reading, Bamidbar, which is the name of the book, Bamidbar, in the desert. But it's also called, in English, it's called Numbers, because also in Hebrew it's called Pekude. And the reason, very simply, is because in this week's Torah portion, God tells Moses to count all the Jews. So he counts all the Jews. All right, so God wants to know the number of the Jewish people. Why does he have to know the number? God doesn't know the number of the Jewish people, but God wants Moses to count the Jewish people because the Jewish people are very dear to God. Which that apparently doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, if they're dear to God, so they're dear to God, what is counting them? How does counting them increase their dearness or what? Who knows what? So let's go. We'll see. Let's see. Parshas Bamidbar, this Torah portion called Bamidbar, length man, we learn, we read all the time, far before, every year before the holiday of Shavuot. The holiday of Shavuot, as you already know, is the commemorating when we received the Torah. We received the Torah, which was 3,335 years ago. I think I have to make the calculation. Their time, the reason of them that we read Parshas Bamidbar, which talks about being in the desert, and it also talks about counting the Jews. The reason we read this, before the holiday of Shavuot, before the holiday of reading the Torah, is in order to mafsik zayin sufficient the tochachas, to separate between all of the curses which were given in Bechukotai, this past Shabbos that we read, on Matan Torah and the giving of the Torah. Vibal because of her, as all in Yanim did everything in the Torah, the Tocham, their inyanis, the thing of smuchin, and among the topics of Torah that we have to pay attention to are the fact that one Torah portion comes right next to another, or a Torah portion comes right next to a holiday. Everything in the Torah is exact. Is Muzman Dachzagan. So we have to say, as does was men leint Davka Parshas Bamidbar, the fact that we read the Torah portion of Bamidbar before the holiday of Shavuot, this is not only in order to separate between the not only to separate between the curses that we heard on this last Shabbat in Bechukotai and the giving of the Torah, nor oich v'al because it must be some important thing that we're speaking about is a preparation for the giving of the Torah. So there must be something positive going on over here, in addition to the fact that it separates between the curses that we heard last Shabbat and giving of the Torah, so they interrupt with Bamidbar. Remember, we learned that before. Parshas Bamidbar in the Torah portion, which is called Bamidbar, Be'ikr is mainly talking about sailing the Yid and counting the Jews. Was to leave them token because of this content of this Torah portion, that their ganze, the whole book, is sometimes called Chumash Pekudim. Sometimes it's called, we in English, it's also called Numbers, Pekudim, because that's the main topic. It's counted. The Jewish people are simply counted. The Jews are counted. Was to leave them because of this, it's called, and also in Parshat Pinchas, we'll learn that later on, it's called the book of counting. This is Numbers. Und wie mir gefindt, and like we find by also something else about counting, that counting is also a preparation for the giving of the Torah. What other type of counting is the preparation and giving of the Torah? Spirit Omer, counting the days. Counting the days, darf man we have to understand what is the mila, what is so important about counting, until that is a zoifil, or if a zoifil is to such a degree as does this is a preparation for the giving of the Torah. Well, again, God just give the Torah to the Jews, and that's it. They have to count the Jews first, and then they have to count the days, and then you can get the Torah. Why? We'll see. Base. The reason for the Eberster, for the Aber for us, why God had Geisen commanded silent the Yidden to count the Jews, says in the Midrash. As does is vile, this is because Yidden Zainen Zer Chashuv. Jewish people are very important by them, Eberster, by God. The Jewish people are called the sons of God, right? Bani Matem. Nimshul Yisrael Barima Shel Chitim. The Jewish people are compared to a big pile of wheat. Ma Hachitim Alu Nichnasim L'Otzer B'Minyan. Just like wheat is put into the silo and it's counted. Right? You want to know how many barrels you have, how many bushels? Also, God said that the Jewish people should be counted constantly. This is just Yiddish. Yiddish translates the same thing. See, is aber not moving, but it's not understood. And why does God have to count the Jews? Why does he have to count the days? What is so important about this counting? Thus was a mensch, the fact which a person counts, for instance, wheat, when he puts it in to his silo, because wheat is so important, tierkeit, and the dearness. This is as doch, so he'll know how much there is. Right? Why does he count the wheat? He wants to know how many bushels there are. So that's why you count, right? But God already knows the number of the Jews. Without counting, is to leave was hat and silent. Why did God say you should count the Jews? So let's be clear a little bit over here. What's going on? We're not saying, when we talk about God, you can make the mistake, and very easily make the mistake, is that God is like a big person or a big angel, and that's all he is. Well, the fact is that God isn't like a big person, he is a big angel. Here we see. God desires that Moses should count the Jews. God talks to Moses. God's angry. God helped the Jews. He listens to their prayers. So God does things. He split the sea. He gave them bread from heaven. God is involved. That's the whole Torah. That's the whole creation. God is creating the creation. Every detail God is creating. That's what we believe. Everything is being directed by God. So we see God does have a personality. There's no doubt about it. God has a personality and God reacts to our prayers. But on the other hand, we're talking about God. God creates all limitations. He creates all definitions. God is not a creation. God, so to speak, doesn't exist. God creates all existence. God is infinitely more real than anything we can possibly imagine. So that sort of takes it out of the realm of human activity. Okay, but nevertheless, we say, so there's something must be in the middle over here. Here we say God cares about every detail. On the other hand, we say God is totally above any possible detail of the world, but possibly detail. But that same God, there's only one God. God creates the world. God is above the world. God is in the world. So what's the answer to that? The answer to that is that it's not understandable. It's totally incomprehensible. That's the God that we believe in. But the fact is that these details really do come from God, and God really does, he does care. But here it seems to be a little bit of an exception. I mean, what does he want us to count the Jews because they're so important to him? If we're looking at it from God's point of view, so God already knows the number of the Jews. Why do we have to count? What is so important about counting and counting the days? He wants us to count. Good, he wants us to count. If he wants us to stand on our head, we'll also do it. That's what God wants. Who knows? But he doesn't want us to stand on our head, but he does want us to count. Why? What's the point? What's the point? Counting Jews, counting days. In Shla, in the book the Shla, Shnei Luchot HaBrit, it's written by a man called Yeshaya Horowitz. It was written like, what, 400 years ago, something. In this book it says, as das wird gebracht und nisbor, and the Shla says, and this is also brought in the teachings of Chabad, of Chassidut, as durch them, that through this, was man hat gezählt, that we counted the Jews, seinen sie gewinnen davar sheva minyan. They become a thing which is counted. I think we talked about this before. Davar sheva minyan lo batel. A thing which is always counted is never negated. Let me just explain this last. A thing which is counted is never negated. This is in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Yeridea, and Simon Kuf Yud. And it says like this. Here's the law. Listen to this. Let's say you go into a store and you buy eggs. You buy 12 eggs. And you put these eggs in, you mix these eggs in, 12 eggs, and you mix these eggs in, put them in the back of your truck, and there are 50,000 eggs. You just bought 12 more because you were missing 12. And suddenly the owner of the store comes running out and says that one of those eggs came from a not kosher bird. And you can't tell the difference between them. Can't tell the difference. Okay, now, so you say, no problem. The law is that if you have one thing that's forbidden, mixed into two things that are permissible, and none of them are important. For instance, you have a piece of meat. This is a strange law, so don't. One piece of hamburger from a not kosher cow, and two pieces of hamburger from a yes kosher cow. So you have three pieces. You don't know which one is the forbidden one. They're all small pieces. The law is they're all permissible. They're all permissible. You can eat all three of them. That's the law. Batel barov. Why? That's why it is. Right? And sometimes, let's say you boil them together. So now that forbidden one gives out a taste, so you have to have 60. You have to have 60. Right? So here we have one not kosher egg, and it is mixed into, what do we say, 10,000 kosher eggs. So even if it was mixed into two other kosher eggs, 1 against 2 is okay. This is no. If that egg is an important thing, then it's never negated. What do you mean an important thing? Go to the town where they sell that egg. How do they sell eggs over there? If they sell eggs by the dozen, in other words, eggs are not important, or if they sell eggs by the bushel, by the basket of eggs. I used to live in a town where they used to sell basket of eggs. It was like a sort of a farmer's town. It would sell a basket of eggs. So if they sell them by baskets, let's say baskets, then an egg is not important. In the basket, they don't really care if you have like 50 eggs in a basket or 51 or 49. You get a basket full of eggs, that's good enough. So each egg is not important. If so, then that forbidden egg is negated in 2. Right? 1 against 2. But if you live in a place where they count the eggs, let's say, for instance, they sell 12 eggs, or they sell 1 at a time eggs. They count the eggs. Oh, then every egg is important. Then if it gets mixed up, now listen to this. If one egg gets mixed up in a million other eggs, one not kosher egg gets mixed up in a million yes kosher eggs, and you can't tell the difference. You can't tell which one is the not kosher one. Then they're all forbidden. Kadavar sheba minyan, a thing which is always counted, ain't batel, it's not negated. That's the law. So the Shlah says that's the same thing. If that's the way it is for bad, that one forbidden thing, if it's a davar that's important, that it's counted, it can never be negated, and it makes everything forbidden. So the same thing for good. The Jewish people, as soon as they're counted, so they can never be negated. Huh? That's pretty good. And the Jewish people, because they're mixed in among all the nations of the world, all of them, and we're outnumbered. Who knows what? 100 to 1, 500 to 1, 1,000 to 1, 2,000 to 1, whatever. We are definitely outnumbered, the Jewish people. There are how many Jewish people in the world? 20,000 Jewish, 20 million. I'm sorry, 20 million Jewish people in the world. 20 million. How many human beings are there in the world? 8 billion. So do the calculations, right? Do the calculations. If there was 80 million Jews against 8 billion, then that would be, what was it? 1%? 80, 80 million against 1, then it would be 80 million. I guess that would be 1%. 80 million against 8 billion, 1%. If there is only 20 million, if there's 40, so that's a half of a percent. So it comes out like what, 1 half. Anyway, a very small number of Jews. Oh, look at this, what I did over here. Wow. Okay. So it says the Jews, nevertheless, are seriously outnumbered, but by means of counting them, so they become a thing which is counted, and a thing which is counted is never negated. So if the thing was counted would be forbidden, it would make all the eggs forbidden, permissible eggs forbidden. But now that we're permissible, so we're never negated. At least we hold on to our identity. Okay, that's it. It's like it says the Jewish people are kivsa ben shivim ze'evim. Like it says the Jewish people are one sheep among 7 wolves. Wie sie später zwischen wie a Shepson, like a sheep among 70 wolves. As kennen sie doch chas v'shalom. So you might think that the Jewish people will be nisbatel veren, they will be negated. Zwischen the umas, among the non-Jews. Therefore, God said, no, count them. Every Jew becomes important, and a Jew can never lose his identity. As the hut, their Eibishter case and sail in the Yidden. So therefore, God said to count the Jews, so the Jews will become an important thing, and they will never be negated. Says the Rebbe, that's what the Shalah says, Shalah Kodesh, but it sort of doesn't make sense. Not, God forbid, to say anything against what the Shalah said, but there's something a little bit lacking from this explanation of why the Jews are counted. Why? Does is aber nit movement, but it's not understood. The reason why a thing which is counted is never negated is because the fact that it's counted, like with the eggs, right? If you have they sell the eggs by number, so every one of them is important, but it's not the number that makes it important. It's because they're important. That's why you count them. So we can't say that counting the Jews gives them importance. If they're important, God counts them. If they're not important, then counting them won't make them important. If so, the question comes back, why count the Jews? It can't be like the Shlos says in order to give them importance. Because counting does not give importance. Counting just shows that the thing already was important. Therefore, it's counted. When a davar, a thing which is important, is not negated, is kumtas oiso, comes out, is nitter tselin. It's not that the counting of a thing makes that thing important, but rather the counting just shows that the thing already was important. So hein vibal, because if the Jews are already the thing that's important to God, vi seinen Wert bezählt zu werden, zu lieb, seine chashivas. How could it be? And they are counted because they're important. As they're nit doch a davar shebeminyan. So the Jewish people are important without being counted. And even if the Jews were not counted. If so, our question comes back, why do you have to count the Jews? Counting them will not make them important. If they're important, they're counted. And if they're important, so you don't have to count them because they're already important. Says the Rebbe, no, that's not the Vigas Achfriya, like we said before. In Parshas B'Midbar, Zachana, this Torah portion is a preparation to the giving of the Torah. The Oivtu from Matan Torah, the whole purpose of the giving of the Torah is connecting the upper worlds to the lower worlds. The purpose of the giving of the Torah wasn't so the Jews will be able to get out of the world. and learn the Torah and leave the world. No, exactly the opposite. The purpose of the Torah is to bring God down here into the world. The commandments, which were before the giving of the Torah, like Abraham did commandments, etc., they did not have this effect on the physical world with which they were done. The commandments. As a zoivi, 1 second, or zei, zollen, veren helik, that the physical things that the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did, even though it was with God's commandment, but did not make the physical things holy. Matan Torah, when God gave the Torah, is given them koach, gave the power that the Jews could, through doing the commandments, they could refine the physical world, the Welt und Macht, the physical world, und Macht from Kedusha, making from it holiness. Oh, so here we have a whole new concept, right? None of the religions talk about this. The world is a holy place. The world is a blessed place. The world is a good place. By doing the commandments, we increase this holiness and we reveal the holiness that is already there. That's what the purpose of the commandments is, to bring holiness into the world. Vibal, because the service of the Jews is after the giving of the Torah, is to make from the world holy, that the world alone itself should be a dwelling place for God. As Darv Zechashivos, therefore, the Jewish people have to express. Jewish people are already important, but the problem is to express this in the world. The Chashivos and Koach from Yidden, Zainin and Azoy Wolfen has to be in a way that the world should feel it. If the importance of the Jewish people would only remain in spiritual, and which the Jews are already important, but that has to be expressed in the world. And it's not expressed in the physical world, is even though the Jews will not be negated in the world, because they'll hold on to their holiness, they'll hold on to the Torah. But good, they didn't do any bad, but they won't do their purpose. In their Welt is Vasarum, that they won't be negated in the world around them. The Welt, the world, Welt oivzein nit gehat kein Shlita. The world would not rule over the Jews. It wouldn't affect them. But Welt over zer koach, but the power of the Jews and the importance of the Jews could not have an effect on be'en flusen the Gashmis, by means of refining the physical world. In other words, the Torah would give us power that we could hold on to our identity and the world wouldn't have a negative effect on us. But that's not the purpose of the Jewish people. It's not the Jewish people. It's like an auto mechanic comes home and he says, I don't have to take a shower today. I didn't, I'm all clean, didn't have any work. His wife will say, well, that's terrible. You don't have any work. And he was, yeah, but at least I come home, don't cut myself, and I don't have to take up this. I sat around, drank a few beers, watched television. He says, well, that's awful. You have a job to do, right? Same thing with the Jewish people. The world did not have a bad effect on us. It didn't make us dirty, but that's not our job. We have a job to do. The Rebbe, therefore, the Jewish people had to be counted actually. God knows the number of the Jews. The Jews are already important. The counting the Jews did not make them important, and it also did not reveal to God how many Jews there are. The Jews already are important, and God knows how many Jews there are. But the counting brings the importance into the world so that the Jews can have a positive effect on the world. In order to express the importance of the Jewish people and doing in the physical world, so the physical world can see, was davka done, which only then can their importance and their power be expressed in the world. Like them, according to this, now it's understood the importance from the Parshas Bamidbar. Why we read this thing about the desert? before Matan Torah, giving Torah. Counting the Jews in the desert was important. Why? Especially as a preparation for the Torah. Durch them, by means of this, was menhat getzelt, which we counted the Jews actually, zir chashuvas, and their importance had been expressed and brought out, and an actual in the world, can say machen from the Welt, they can make from the world a mikdash lo, a holy place for God. The whole world will be holy and blessed. Was thus is their tachlis, that's the whole purpose of the giving of the Torah. And we'll continue this, God willing, tomorrow. And now a story. 1 minute.